Good evening and welcome to the virtual Rotary 7620 District Conference. As a reminder, if you need any assistance during the session, please go to support.goto.com/webinar. I will now welcome our MC for the evening, Andy Baum. Mr. Andy, you're not unmuted, sir. There you go.
Thank you. Good evening, fellow Rotarians. We'll start this again, spouses and guests. I am Past District Governor Andy Baum, and I have the pleasure to be tonight's host. Welcome to the 2021 District Conference, live from Annapolis, Maryland, and many other locations throughout our district. Through the power of live stream over the next 2 days, you'll have the opportunity to enjoy tremendous speakers, informative breakout sessions, and join in the recognition of many individual Rotarians and clubs who have exemplified the Rotary spirit. The second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021 witnessed a full Rotary year under the grips of a pandemic. Many organizations were impacted by the inability to meet, and they struggled to survive. Rotary and Rotarians rallied around our motto, service above self, and gave their time, talent, and resources to help their club, their community, their country, and the world thrive. I remember a message from 20 years ago when I had the opportunity to serve as your governor. The resolution of Rotarians to tackle the problems other organizations do not have the resources to handle place us in a unique position as we move forward. That comment resonates as clear today as it did back then. Rotary opens opportunities. This year's theme could not have been more appropriate. So again, welcome to tonight's program. It is with pleasure that I ask District Governor-elect Geetha Jairam as she leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Geetha. Please join District Governor nominee designate Dolores Edwards as she leads us in the four-way test.
Good evening, my fellow Rotarians. Welcome to the District Conference. I have the honor tonight of leading us in our four-way test. For those of you who do not know, this is a test that basically is a moral code for our personal and business relationships. And so we recite it at every Rotary function, and we recite it even in our weekly meetings. And so I'm going to lead it. You can read along with me or recite at home. Okay, so the four-way test reads as follows. Of the things that we say, that we think, say, and do in Rotary. 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And so with that, I say have a great district conference, and I'm going to send this over back to District Governor, Past District Governor Andy Baum.
Thank you, Dolores. Appreciate that. At this time, please welcome Reverend Dr. Carletta Allen from the Annapolis Rotary Club, who will present tonight's invocation.
Good evening, District 7620. So good to be with you. However, virtually in person, it's always good to be with you. Let us pray. Creator of all, we come gathered together as a district. knowing that we are part of something that is so much bigger. And yet, we as District 7620 come together to celebrate, to remember, to memorialize, and to anticipate all that you have already prepared for us. We thank you for the leadership of this year, of all the years past. We thank you for every unnamed and sometimes unknown person who has brought us to this moment. What a year we have had. You have called us to be flexible, to be creative, to be powerful in the midst of a pandemic. And through it all, we were called to be generous, to remember service above self. Accept our thanksgiving for this day, for this conference and all its blessings. Remind us that no matter what happens, we remain focused on the objectives we have for the world: peace, tranquility, freedom from hunger and oppression and sickness. We thank you for the freedoms that we enjoy in this country, the freedom to choose our own destinies. And we reaffirm our commitment to our simple Rotary four-way test for all we do and support. You have given us a mighty charge, and we have answered. Grant us courage for the living of these days. Make us people of hope, people of light who shine into the darkness that so many still see and feel around the world. Bless the leadership of our district, the leadership of each club, and the leadership of this global entity called Rotary. Amen.
Thank you, Carletta. Thank you very much for that wonderful words. It's my pleasure at this time and my honor at this time to present our District Governor, Jimmy Gorski, as she presents her year in review. In a year when masks and social distancing became the norm, Jimmy found ways to connect with our clubs and Rotarians and gave inspiration that led to many successes and accomplishments this Rotary year. Please welcome District Governor Jimmy Gorski.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andy. And thank all of you for being here with me tonight. Rotarians, Rotaractors, Interactors, Director, RI Director Peter Kyle, and guests, including a couple of honored guests, past district governors from District 7620 who have moved away. One is Bob Grill, who's now in 7630. Bob was a longtime member of the Rotary Club of Upper Prince George's County and co-founder of the Disaster Aid USA. Also, we welcome back to 7620 Anna Mae Kobe and her husband Doug, who are now in Pennsylvania but are joining us tonight also. Thank you so much for making the effort to come back to your home in Rotary 7620. Thanks to all of you for being here this weekend to celebrate our theme of the year, Rotary Opens Opportunities, and our many successes achieved by our work together. It did not take us long to hone our skills in virtual communication and virtual learning as our meetings, projects, and overall Rotary business became virtual because of a global pandemic. We adjusted well to this opportunity with the help of those in our district who had for some time been Zooming and going to meeting and accepting these other platforms as household terms. Rotarians are people of action, and we seized the opportunity to adjust our service projects to become virtual events. Following quickly, attendance at our club meeting, club leadership training, our membership summit, our Polio Day celebration, and district environmental webinar totally exceeded our expectations. Our virtual events and training attracted attendees like none before. and the numbers continue to grow. For the most part, we are well on our way to success in spite of COVID. Soon, the announcement came from our Zone 33 leadership that District 7620 was first in membership growth, a position we have held since the beginning of the Rotary year. Others asked for a secret of our success. We cited hard work and determination, and guidance and inspiration from our Rotary International President, Holger Knack, who asked us to do the following things. Here are his guidelines. First, Holger asked us and asked all our districts to work to create new and innovative club models, to try organizing satellite clubs, and to form more Rotaract and Interact clubs. Then RI created a position called New Club Advocate to help the membership chair. Next, President Holger asked us to recognize that we are in this together, in reference to growing clubs well before the expression became associated with fighting COVID. If one club is not a good match for a prospective new member, Holger said, find a club that will be a good match, even though it may not be your own club. Further, he asked that we select members carefully, looking for Rotarians, not simply members of Rotary, and declared never to ask us how many new members we would promise to find per year. Then he said, engage the new members and take care of them, nurturing new members. But he also cautioned never to forget the faithful members who have been with us for years. Holger explained that both are precious to us in Rotary. Finally, he said, there is no wrong age to join Rotary. If the most important goals of the Rotary year are membership, membership, and membership, we are certainly excelling. As your district governor, I am so pleased with members and clubs for putting this district in such a favorable position. We are District 7620, and we can be proud of that fact. Give yourselves a big round of applause. And as promised, the membership committee is sponsoring a spring membership event. So stay posted for that event update. I'll move on now to something that was new during my year, and that was the formation of 3 new committees. This year, Rotary recognized a 7th focus area, the environment. District 7620 formed a new environmental committee. And I have it on good authority that our committee produced the first environmental webinar held in any district worldwide. As with other virtual events, district attendance was amazingly encouraging. We realized there are many in our district who are interested in environmental issues and began a new environmental award for our district called Enviro Awards for projects done to improve our environment. This year we have 20 environmental awards being presented to Rotary, to Rotaract, and also to Interact clubs. Be sure to see these and other district awards presented Saturday evening. Share in our celebration, our opportunities turned into success. Another first was in 7620 was DISC. That's the District International Service Committee, enthusiastically formed to help clubs partner for impact in international service projects. The request for DISC in each district came from RI, and our Rotarians were quick to get to work. Dedicated committee members offer monthly reports in open forum, the district newsletter. When you read about all the projects, I think you will be amazed by the depth and diversity. And by diversity, Equity and Inclusion DEI Committee has formed to facilitate activities at the club and district levels. Mark your calendars for May 22nd, the district's first DEI webinar. I commend all those involved in the clubs and in the district. One of our district initiatives this year was Stepping Up to Hunger. Clubs were asked to summarize the many projects they do to reduce food insecurity within our district. Our district also supported the Zone 33 Feed 10 Million project. The district, together with the Gaithersburg Rotary Club, sponsored a forum on hunger with Senator Ben Cardin as guest speaker. Senator Cardin, a longtime advocate for Rotary and our programs to combat hunger in Maryland and Washington, D.C., sees Rotary as an able group responding to community needs. As the effects of COVID intensified, area governors were asked to identify one non-Rotarian in each of our 12 areas whose work helped to promote the lives of those in his or her community. These Rotary Community Heroes will be announced tomorrow as they received honorary Paul Harris Fellows. Please join the program to honor these outstanding leaders and perhaps future Rotarians in our district. Early in the Rotary year, the District Bylaws Committee, led by District Governor nominee Sean McAllister, was charged with the duty of revamping our bylaws, which had not been done since 2013. The work of the committee covered about 9 months. Please plan to attend the bylaw session on Saturday. All Rotarians in District 7620 who are registered for the district conference are eligible to vote. The new Finance Committee, formed this year, produced the first District 7620 Finance Policies, Procedures, and Governance, a document which memorializes financial policies and procedures, including basic information about the district's banking, tax considerations, and regulatory filings. At the same time, the district instituted a conflict of interest policy and confidentiality agreement for district leaders. This year, the district website received a much needed update to make it more user-friendly and streamlined. Look at the improvements. As we move on to the Rotary Foundation, I am pleased to report that the District 7620 Central Maryland and DC Endowment Fund was formed at the Rotary Foundation to bring spendable earnings back to our district DDF share funds for grants on an annual basis in perpetuity. Just a few weeks ago, the district received a $225,000 donation from the past District Governor Robert and Joanne Hanson directed gifts for global grants to provide global grants that addressed education and literacy. We are busy working on ways for these funds to be used in the most productive way. Highest praise goes to past District Governor and current District Rotary Foundation Chair, Richard Glover, for the education webinars he created and presented to the district, to clubs, and to individuals. Members have grown in intensity in their knowledge of the operations of the Rotary Foundation. To help us understand the extent of the efforts and accomplishments of Rich Glover, I now present the first of 2 special awards this evening. In 2020, past District Governor Richard Glover was nominated by our district and selected by Rotary International Foundation trustees to the position of District Rotary Foundation Chair. His assignment is with authority and the responsibility for planning, organizing, and directing District 7620 so that impactful and sustainable goals can be reached to do good in our communities and around the world. As District Rotary Foundation leader, past District Governor Rich has worked tirelessly to evolve and align District 7620 with success. With a clear vision, hand in hand aligned with district leadership, and working closely with club leadership and members, past District Governor Rich believes that to be successful, a leader must point out the goals, make sure all involved have the necessary tools, knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement, keeping everyone working together for maximum results and success. This Rotary year, past District Governor Rich has delivered significant and measurable outcomes by solving problems, building teams, and inspiring us with history and knowledge of the Rotary Foundation. The Rotary Foundation's accomplishments include to date: establishing the District 7620 Central Maryland and DC Endowment Fund, bringing spendable earnings back to our district DDF share funds for grants on the annual basis into perpetuity, establishing the Rotary Foundation Learning Series, establishing a diverse and highly qualified grants subcommittee team under the leadership of Rotarian B.J. Skinner of the Rotary Club of Parole, establishing criteria that moves the scale from 40% of District 7620 membership contributing to the annual fund to over 50%. Past District Governor Rich reminded us that we are the engine for grants by contributing to the annual fund each year. Increasing every Rotarian every year from 40% to 50%. Club leadership rallied their members to become involved in being the engine that supports the funds of grants. Increasing new Paul Harris Fellow members from 40% to over 50%. Increasing Paul Harris Society members by 35 members in 9 months under the leadership of Dave Vogel from the Parole Club. And spearheading the Legacy Fund campaign with member pledges by cash, bequest, endowment funds, which surpassed $1 million in March 2020. The annual District Foundation dinner is scheduled for November 21st of 21. A man of vision, a man of integrity, a tireless and selfless worker for the good of our district. The Service Above Self Award for 2020-21 is hereby presented to Richard Glover. And now I'll move to the second of the awards I'd like to present this evening. This is Rotarian of the Year. The role of the district governor is a demanding one, as those who are elected to serve to this office know full well. This individual has made the Rotary year more productive and more manageable through her wisdom, support, and practicality. For her, no task is too large, no task too small. She is, without a doubt, amazing. This year, she has served her last year as area governor, encouraging the clubs in her area and answering their needs. She has been tireless through the pre-presidents-elect training seminars, the Chesapeake Presidents-elect training seminar, club leadership training, the membership summit, the environmental webinar, and on throughout our year, district events and meetings. Every district governor needs the support of someone like her. Her dedication to service and loyal devotion to the ideals of Rotary have never been more prominent than in her role as the district conference chair for this year. She's an outstanding leader for her club and for District 7620. And she has been the district governor's right-hand person throughout the year. The Rotarian of the Year Award for 2021 goes to Area Governor and Special Assistant Sue Weber. I'd like you to be sure to stay for the Saturday evening program closing remarks for more awards and recognition. I have a number of those to offer, and I hope that you will be present to experience them and appreciate them together with me. Now we prepare for our keynote speaker, Dr. Doug Tallamy, and he is going to be introduced soon. But at this point, I turn the meeting over to the conference over to Andy Baum.
Well, let me get back here, folks. You probably can hear me, but maybe not see me at this point. Either way, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Chris Puttock, the past president of the College Park Rotary Club. I've known Chris for quite a few years, had the opportunity to work with him on a couple of projects, and have just followed him ever since I was the chair of the Grants Committee. Chris has spent 3 decades in the environmental conservatorship area, and it's his focus has always been on the maintenance of ecosystems naturally. So I turn this over right now to Chris to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. Chris?
Well, thank you very much, Shandy, for that introduction. It's my absolute great pleasure to introduce Doug Tallamy to my Rotary family tonight, to Peter Kyle, Jimmy, Geeta, Sean, Dolores, our Rotarians, our Rotaractors, and our Interactors. I'd like to welcome Doug to speak to us. Doug is the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he's taught and authored 104 research publications and taught insect-related courses for 40 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens, was published by Timber Press in 2007 and was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. His next book was co-authored with Rick Dark, called The Living Landscape, and was published in 2014. Following that, Doug's new book, Nature's Best Hope, was released by Timber Press in February 2020 and is still a New York Times bestseller. Among his awards are the Garden Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award of Excellence, the 2018 American Horticultural Society B.Y. Morrison Communication Award, and the 2019 Cynthia Westcott Scientific Writing Award. He has an amazing background in what he's going to speak to about tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome my esteemed colleague, Doug Tallamy, to help us decide who is nature's best hope.
Thank you, Chris. Can I just get confirmation that people can see this? Are we up and running?
Yes, we can
I can
see
see.
and hear you. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, excellent. All right, I do want to talk about what my idea of nature's best hope is, but as a transition, way back in 1970, my wife, Cindy Plyler, who lived in Thornton, PA, was sent to Bolivia for a year by the Rotary. So there's the opportunity you were talking about. Okay, nature's best hope. Before I talk about that, let's revisit what happened in 2019, not this past fall, but a year ago fall. We had what I call an oak mast, where all the members of the Red Oak group got together and produced their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I'm easily entertained, so I took one of those acorns and I just stared at it, and I was rewarded. An insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First, it chewed a hole for its head, forced its head through there, then it forced its entire body through that little hole. It's a very tight squeeze, kind of looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally plopped down. Very dangerous time for this insect larva because it's good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it wiggles and squirms its way below the surface of the soil in about 30 seconds. And once underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a little chamber. And then within that chamber, converts itself to a pupa and stays there for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. This is what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses because it looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule. And the mouth parts are way down here at the end of that extension. And they take those mouth parts and chew a hole into the center of the acorn, turn around and lay an egg in that hole, and that is how the larva gets into the acorn. You might wonder why they spend 2 years underground. Why don't they come out the very next year? Well, it takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if the acorn weevils came out the next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns. That, of course, leaves a hole in the acorn, a true vacuum. You know that nature abhors a vacuum. In this case, she has filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants. These are tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the holes made by acorn weevils in acorns. And if they find a new acorn, they're excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So they tell everybody, time to move. They grab the larvae, they grab the eggs, they move the entire colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes. Then they post a guard, make sure nobody else comes in, and that's where they'll live for the next 2 years until this acorn falls apart. Well, about this point, my wife says, what is your point? What are you trying to tell us? I'm trying to tell you that is just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions, largely between animals and plants. Specialization such as the interaction between jays and acorns. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. Between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. Carpenter ants are what they feed their young. And of course, you won't have carpenter ants unless you have the large trees that make them. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have Phacelia. That is the only plant, the only pollen that bee can rear its young on. As a matter of fact, pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We have 4,000 species of native bees, and 1/3 of them can only reproduce in the pollen of particular plants. So you won't have 13 species of native bees if we don't have perennial sunflowers in this area. You won't have the Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtlehead. I could talk about specialized interactions all night. The point is that these interactions are, they're in trouble. They're on the ropes. Nature itself is on the ropes, and it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. The problem, of course, is that we can't leave the country as it was because we haven't. Only 5% of the lower 48 states is anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it, we have drained it, we have grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in this country. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers, introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves, and each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated from other such remnants to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done this? Well, I imagine we thought the Earth, our nest, was so large we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. Of course, we were wrong about that, and that's why we're seeing pretty scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline, followed by this one. North America has lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population gone. Now the UN says, well, we're actually going to lose 1 million species to extinction, possibly within the next 20 years. And they report this as if it's an option. It is not an option, folks. We have to make sure that does not happen. Well, I can go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, and thus upon all of our houses, but that is not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from a lot of people, but those efforts will deliver enormous psychological, physical, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, the great E.O. Wilson, the greatest entomologist of all times, told us what it would mean if we were to lose insects on planet Earth. And he did it in this paper way back in 1987, The Little Things That Run the World. His message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, and even many of our freshwater fish, those food webs would collapse and those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the Earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans would not survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do it. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are totally dependent on healthy ecosystems. We are products of nature. We depend on what we call ecosystem services. These are some of the things that plants deliver for us and everything else, by the way, like the production of oxygen, like clean water, carbon capture, enormously important ecosystem service today. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, locking it up in their tissues, and then pumping the extra carbon into the ground. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have stored there over the eons. Plants build topsoil and hold it in place. They prevent floods. They dampen severe weather. They convert sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight ourselves, and that's going to be hard. What do animals do for plants? Well, they provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So developing landscapes or designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. It never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because we have so many people on the planet. We've got 7.8, 7.9 billion people on the planet. We need more ecosystem services today than ever before. So taking large portions of the Earth out of production, poor idea. There have been visionaries through the years who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth. And Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. And one of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, there have been indigenous groups that have been good at doing that, but you know, our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies have been terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the Earth than it has to offer, completely ruining an area and going to another area and ruining that. Clearly not sustainable behavior. So Aldo had a dream that we humans were actually capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the Earth. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he dreamt that we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. And that's what he called the land ethic. He wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac. What he never wrote about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I'm pretty sure that the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still embedded in our own culture, that he may not have recognized it as an option. Tonight, what I hope to convince you of is that living with nature not only is an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head. We need to save nature, actually recreate it where there are a lot of people, because that is most everywhere. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, but thrive. Where should we start? Let's go back to private property. Most of the country is privately owned. 85% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, because otherwise we're not dealing with enough land. So when I talk about conservation, I'm really talking about, again, rebuilding nature where we've dismantled it. What we have to do is put those specialized relationships back together again so that we have functional ecosystems. But not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally. So we have to focus on the most important groups of species. And there are two I want to emphasize. Those flowering plants, they're capturing the energy from the sun, turning it into food, and that's what supports the rest of life on Earth. You're not going to have those flowering plants unless you have the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. So that's one group we need. Now the energy from the sun is locked up in the leaves of those plants. Most animals don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants. That something typically is insects, and not just any insects. It turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So when we design natural systems, when we design landscapes, they have to include a lot of caterpillars or they will have failed food webs. Let me give you an example from Carolina chickadees. It's one of the birds that are at our bird feeders all winter long, eating seed. And people think, well, that's what they need. About 50% of their diet in the winter is seeds. The other 50% is insects. But when they are reproducing, when they're feeding their young, their babies can't eat seeds, so they switch entirely to insects. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will feed their young exclusively on caterpillars. And it turns out they're not exceptions. 96% of our terrestrial birds are rearing their young on insects, and again, most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? There's several studies that suggest that, but this is a citizen science project that one of my grad students did recently, Ashley Kennedy. She put out a call to bird photographers across the country and said, please take pictures of birds while they were bringing food to the nest and send those pictures to her. She was going to identify the prey items that were in the beaks of the birds and reconstruct the nestling diet of as many birds in this country as she could. And she got thousands of pictures. So what you're looking at are the nestling diets of the 20 of the common bird families in North America. And the green bars are the percentage of those nestling diets that are caterpillars. And in 16 out of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominate the diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we took caterpillars out of our landscapes. Most of our birds would not be able to reproduce. So why caterpillars? What's special about caterpillars? There's a number of things that are special, and one of them is they're soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is the exoskeleton, the cuticle. It's made of chitin. It is undigestible, and birds don't want a lot of it. And because caterpillars are soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. And if you've ever seen a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. They take that beak and just stuff it down there like a plunger. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar. They're nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, very low percentage of chitin compared to most other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages, they're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and a lot of beetles have very sharp edges. And finally, caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids, not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates. And vertebrates cannot make their own carotenoids. They have to get them from plants. Only plants make carotenoids. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. And that's why my wife, Cindy, makes sure I have a lot of carrots, so I get my beta carotene, and a lot of tomatoes, so I get my lycopene, and a lot of whatever that is, so I get my lutein. And when I eat those things, they stimulate my immune system. And I can't think of a better time to have a very strong immune system. They're antioxidants. They run around our body, protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality, improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this prothonotary warbler male who is bright yellow because he has had access to lots of luteins. And he takes those luteins and he makes pigments out of them and puts them in his feathers. And the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Where are the birds getting their carotenoids? From what they eat, of course. But these first two bars are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of bird prey items. Here are the adult caterpillars way down here, the moths and butterflies themselves. Fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. It's the caterpillars that eat the green leaves. And here is the earthworm way down here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So this and other studies suggest that caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. It's really looking like they're essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many do they need? Is 1 or 2 enough, or 1 or 2 a day enough? Well, let's go back to chickadees for that answer. We've got a lot of data on chickadees. 1 or 2 is not enough. It takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get 1 clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars for another 21 days. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to make 1 clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. That's 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and we do want them to breed in our yards because in so many places that's the only place left, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard. Because the chickadees forage about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we design landscapes that don't support all those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it really is looking like it's directly related to bird decline. We went to the original data set from Rosenberg et al., the other group that said we've lost 3 billion birds, and we split the terrestrial birds up into species that require insects at some part of their life history, typically when they're reproducing, and the species that don't need insects ever, like the doves and the finches can reproduce on seeds. They didn't lose any numbers in the last 50 years, but the birds that require insects on average lost 10 million individuals per species. This doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly is suggestive that as insects decline, so do birds. And this is not rocket science. If you take away the food, you're gonna lose the birds. So how do we landscape for caterpillars? I recognize this is a new goal. In the past, we have landscaped for aesthetics only. As a matter of fact, any caterpillar that was in our yard, we made sure we killed it. So we're not gonna do that anymore. We landscape for caterpillars by adding the plants that make caterpillars. That makes sense, but there is a catch. And that is that most plants don't support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about which plants we use. And we have to be fussy because the caterpillars themselves are very fussy about which plants they can eat. And the monarch butterfly illustrates that perfectly. You can have all the crepe myrtles and all of the ginkgos and all of the calorie pear and boxwoods and hostas and all the other Asian plants we decorate our yards with, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing they're going to develop on is milkweeds. That's called host plant specialization, and most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Why? Because plants have made them that way. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded the leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. And a single insect species can't adapt to all of them. So they pick 1 or 2 that are very similar, and they develop the adaptations necessary to circumvent those defenses. They develop the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, the behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of evolutionary history with those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. It does not happen overnight. And when they do fall into place, the insect is then locked into eating that particular group of plants because they didn't spend any time developing adaptations for other plants. And that's why when we bring in plants from other continents, most of our insects are unable to eat them. So all I'm saying here is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to rebuild food webs where we've dismantled them. We have to choose the right plants or it's not going to work. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well it does work when we do choose the right plants. I'm going to start with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. This is where my wife Cindy and I live. I'm sitting in this window right now. Farm was broken up. Very old farm, been farmed for 300 years. The last thing they did before they sold the farm was to mow it for hay. So there are practically no plants there. And this is what it looked like when we moved in. So our goal was to rebuild the biodiversity on this land that had been exhausted for 300 years. So the way to do that is to put the plants that support the caterpillars, that support the birds and everything else back on your yard. So here's how it went. I wanted to see if I could attract the Canadian owlet to my yard. That's what a Canadian owlet looks like. I'd never seen one before. That's what the adult looks like. Well, in order to have Canadian owlets, you have to have meadow rue. That's the only plant that can eat. And of course, we didn't have any meadow rue. There's no meadow rue around here that I know of. The place was farmed to death for hundreds of years. Meadow rue long gone. So I got some meadow rue seeds, planted them. They grew very well. But you know, this was early on, and I really didn't have all that much confidence that any Canadian owlets would be able to find my little patch of meadow rue. So I didn't go out and check it for about 2 months. Finally, I did walk by accidentally, and there were Canadian owlet caterpillars all over my meadow rue. So it's a big success. Now we have a good population of meadow rue and Canadian owlets. So we've added 2 species to the property. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer. This beautiful moth has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on this plant, Bidens aristosa. I did know where there was some Bidens in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I got some seeds, planted them. They grew very nicely. Well, it took a year for the moth to come find my Bidens, but it has, and now we got a good population of both of these. So now we've added 4 species to the property. Same story with the hackberry emperor. I wanted the hackberry emperor on our property because it's a butterfly that should be here, not because it's the prettiest butterfly. It's just one of the butterfly species that ought to be at our house. But as its name suggests, it requires hackberry, and we didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry, walked by one of my hackberry trees this past June, and there were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So another big success. Now we've added 6 species. And that's the way it went. I did not plant goldenrod. It came in on its own, but along with it came many of the things that develop on goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. This is one that hasn't come, the goldenrod flower moth. I don't know why it hasn't come. That's what the caterpillar looks like. But this is part of the fun. This is anticipation. It's like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out and check my goldenrod, see if I can find this caterpillar. And one of these years I will find it, and that would be a great year. I planted Virginia creeper. A lot of people don't like Virginia creeper, maybe because it's got the name creeper in there. I don't know. It's a great native plant. It can climb our native trees without strangling them. It's a great pollinator plant. When it flowers, makes great berries for the birds in the fall. Good fall color, and it also is the major host plant for the large sphinx moths that are the major part of the diet of our cardinals. Like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Fun to see if I can get this interesting looking caterpillar, the double-tooth prominent, just because it's so cool looking. Who wouldn't want the double-tooth prominent? Well, it's a specialist on elm, and we didn't have any elm, so I scooped up some elm seeds from the University of Delaware campus. We had some big elms that never died. Planted them. They grew very nicely, grew very quickly. They're 19 years old at this point, and they're about 80 feet tall, way up there. Caterpillar came right away. Another big success. There's American elm. Want to see if I get the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. So we didn't have any evening primrose, but I planted it, and the adult moth comes and spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, these are just examples of the plants that we put on our property. I want to focus on oaks for a while because they are such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And a lot of people say, you know, I don't want to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if you can't enjoy your oak until it's 400 years old, that's right, you won't. But if you can enjoy what your oak is doing in your property, its ecological role, you can enjoy it right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted my oaks as acorns, which made them free, by the way. And the very first year, they started to attract the moths, the caterpillars that support the food web in my yard. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the delightful dagger moth, the pleasant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to the oaks on my property, and they come right away. This is a pin oak, that has just popped its head above the leaf litter. And here is a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. So they start to contribute to your food web almost immediately. This is what our house will look like in a week or two. I'm still sitting in this window up here. Just to show you, we put plants back. Now, I haven't put all the plants back, but I'm still working on it. And every time I put a new plant lineage on our property, new species of moths come. And 4 years ago, I made it a goal to try to take pictures of every species of moth on our property. And I am up to 1,044 species. Not done yet. And I haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. Now we have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the landmass of Pennsylvania, we have 40% of all the moth species that occur in the entire state. And because so many of those moths are types of bird food, we have recorded 59 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres, not flown by, but bred. Another headline we saw this past fall from the World Wildlife Fund was that was this one: 2/3 of the Earth's wildlife had disappeared since 1970. But I'm thinking not at our house. I can pretty much guarantee that we have increased our biodiversity by at least 2/3, and probably more than that. And it didn't take that long, and we did it simply by putting the plants back. So I offer this as a ray of hope. We can turn these very frightening headlines around. We just have to put the plants back. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres, and a lot of people don't have 10 acres. Will it work on smaller properties, particularly in suburbia? That is a good question. Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpster's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They own 0.6 acres. And they are in a typical suburban neighborhood. All their neighbors have the big lawns. When they moved in, the property was choked with the very common invasive plant out there, bush honeysuckle or Amur honeysuckle. So the first thing they did was get rid of their Amur honeysuckle. Then they planted a bunch of native plants and they put it in a water feature. And then they sat back and started to count the birds that were using their yard. They're up to 149 bird species, including 35 warbler species. And just to put that in perspective, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. We have 18 times more property than they do. So does it work on small properties? Yes, it does. How about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, because right on the other side of this wall is O'Hare Airport, one of the runways of O'Hare Airport. Kennedy Expressway is over here. Pam has 1/10 of an acre. It's 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. And she is an island. There's no connectivity with any natural area at all. She's a pretty island, but she's an island. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive plants, planted 60 species of native plants, put in a water feature, and then she sat back and started to count the bird species that have used her yard, and she's up to 118 species, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, you can go to Pam's house in Chicago. What about in city centers, though? 82% of us live in cities. Well, in 2014, I was staring at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa. People call it butterfly weed, which reminds me, we have a marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So let's not call this butterfly weed. Let's call it Monarch's Delight. Okay, 2014, I'm staring at Monarch's Delight, and the first thing I saw were 2 species of leafcutter bees, megachilid bees. I know they're leafcutter bees because they collect their pollen on their tummy. not on their legs. Well, leafcutter bees have very strict requirements or they won't be in an area. They need pollen and they need nectar, but they also need soft leaves. And leaves of redbud are perfect because they cut the edges out of those leaves, leave these little semicircles, and they roll up what they cut out into a tube, stuff it full of pollen, lay an egg on it, and then they put that whole package into a crack or a crevice. Well, there was a redbud growing right next to Monarch's Delight, and I'm sure that's why there were leafcutter bees there. I'm also pretty sure that's why there were bumblebees there. Remember, bumblebees overwinter as queens. All the workers die in the fall, and when she emerges in the spring, right now, when you see any bumblebee flying around now, it is a queen. She's got to start the entire colony by herself. So what she needs is very efficient access to a lot of blooms, and that's exactly what redbud supplies. And then I saw a monarch. Actually, I said 2 monarchs. Now, this was 2014. I had gone all of 2013 without seeing a single monarch. That was the low point of the eastern population of monarchs. Only 3.6% of the monarchs left. And this was June, which is early to see monarchs up this far north. So I was encouraged. Maybe they weren't going to disappear after all. Why were they there? Well, they had Monarch's Delight, but there was also another species of milkweed there. I think it was purple milkweed. So they had nectar, but they also had their host plant. They could lay their eggs. That's all they need. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of Manhattan, the middle of New York City. If you're not familiar with it, the High Line is it was an abandoned elevated railroad 30 feet above the taxis that was converted to make a tourist destination. Somebody went up there years ago and found there were a whole bunch of native plants growing on their own without being tended at all. So they sunk the money into it. It is now a major tourist destination. Literally millions of people visit the High Line every year. But that's what they're visiting here. This little strip, 3-foot strip of plantings, and it gives them some exposure to nature in the middle of Manhattan. This is Rick Dark. He was always after me to go to the High Line to see the beautiful plants. I'm not much of a city boy, so I always drag my feet. And seeing a beautiful plant that has nothing using it is actually depressing to me. And that's what I thought I would find in the middle of Manhattan. I knew I'd see pretty plants, but I didn't think anything would be there. But I saw everything I saw that I just described to you in the first 20 minutes. Somebody's done a survey of the bees using the plants on the High Line. They're up to 30 species. So I was completely wrong. Things are finding this little strip of nature in the middle of Manhattan, which suggests to me that if thoughtful native plantings can bring life back to the center of Manhattan, we can succeed anywhere. There are 4 things we need to think about if we want to succeed in a big way, though. And one of them is we've got to shrink the area we have in lawn. We've got over 40 million acres of lawn nationwide, which is bigger than the size of New England. And of course, lawn is a dead ecological scape. It's a status symbol. So we're not going to give up our status symbols, and I'm not suggesting we get rid of lawn, but I am suggesting we cut the area of lawn in half. And if we cut the area of lawn in half, that gives us 20 million acres that we could put towards conservation. And if we do it at home, we can create a new national park that I'm calling Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. What do you get when you build a park at home? You get the opportunity to develop a personal relationship with the natural world, and you can do it at your own time and your own pace. And if you do it, there are a lot of health benefits associated with that. You can avoid crowds. I mean, if you go to a real national park, there are millions of people there. It's also free. There's no admission fee. It's never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the pike. No travel hassles. You get to experience the natural world alone. And I don't know how you can develop that personal relationship with the natural world unless you are alone. And this is particularly important for our kids. Our kids are suffering from nature deficit disorder. So we're trying. We get 30 kids and put them on a bus with a teacher, and they drive for an hour and they walk around for an hour. Teacher tells them not to touch anything. Then they get back on the bus and then they go home. And that's their experience with the natural world, which I'm sure is better than nothing. But it's really an experience with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they've got some piece of nature at home, they can go outside alone, no parental supervision, let them create that relationship by themselves, which is important because they're the future stewards of our planet. And if they don't have a personal relationship with what they're stewarding, they're going to be lousy stewards. And maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter. This is Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest piece of nature. It's a patch of lawn with a hedge. But there are anoa lizards there. And she sent me this picture to show me how you hunt anoa lizards. You get on the ground and you disguise yourself with sticks and leaves so the lizards don't see you coming. Then you crawl very slowly towards the lizard. No smiling. This is serious business. You can wear your best dress, that's okay. But you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, and then you're a steward of that lizard. You've got a personal relationship with that part of nature. Now, I don't think Zoe's gonna be crawling on the ground, catching lizards in her best dress the rest of her life. I don't think. She just sent me this picture too, so maybe she will be. But I guarantee she's going to remember doing this, catching lizards in Hawaii the rest of her life. And I also guarantee that will help her be a good steward of the planet. And if you want to get on Homegrown National Park, go to our new website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and get yourself on the map. You go to, you follow the directions for entering your location, where you are, and how much of your lawn you're going to convert to native plants. Put that information in, and your little piece of your county will light up. And you'll get to see who else is on the map with you. This is our attempt to get beyond the choir, convince other people to join in and help to renaturalize that 20 million acres of lawn. And if we do that, why stop there? Let's do the entire country. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants are we going to put in the half of lawn we take out of lawn? Some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. Now remember the Roman arch? The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take the keystone out, the arch collapses. Well, I'm calling these plants keystone plants because they're making most of the food. And if you take them out of the food web collapses. Just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of that caterpillar food. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food. So think of the keystone plants in your yard as if you're building an ecological house, the keystone plants are the 2x4s of that house. They're essential for the house to stand up. You cannot build a house out of wallpaper. It's not the only thing your house is built out of, but those are essential parts of your house. So the question is no longer simply, are native plants better for the environment than non-native plants? On average, they certainly are. But there are actually a lot of native plants that aren't contributing that much either. So let's focus on the most ecologically productive ones. They're better than the benign ones and much better than those Asian ornamentals that escape our yards, like Callery pear and barberry and burning bush, porcelain berry, and become serious ecological threats to our ecosystems. I get an email once in a while from somebody saying, don't you know that ginkgos, Ginkgo biloba from Asia, actually grew in North America 7 million years ago? That makes them native. That means we can plant them and everything will be great. Well, yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today, but I'm not going to have that argument because that's not our metric anymore. It's not whether they're native or not, it's whether they're productive or not. I don't care if ginkgos grew on the moon 7 million years ago, they produce 0 species of caterpillars today here in North America. And that's the metric. So if you're trying to support food webs, ginkgos are not going to do it. What is going to do it? Oaks are the #1 keystone plant in 84% of the counties of North America. And just in the mid-Atlantic states, they support 557 species of caterpillars, 557 species of bird food, over 950 species of caterpillars nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that. If you want to find out what the keystone plants are in your county where you live, go to Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website and put in your zip code, and the ranked list, ranked in terms of the number of species of caterpillars they support, of both woody plants and herbaceous plants will pop up for your county. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn, we're going to put in keystone plants, invite a lot of insects to our yards, and then we're going to kill them with our security light. And that, of course, is not the goal. There's a lot of evidence coming, particularly from Europe, that light pollution at night is a major cause of insect declines. These are all the ways that our lights are killing our insects at night. And this is actually good news to me. We cannot tolerate insect declines. We must turn that around. And if simply flicking a switch is going to help in that regard, we're getting off easy. That is the easiest thing we can possibly do. Just turn out your lights. But I know what you're going to say. I can't turn out the light over my garage because the bad man will come. Okay, put a motion sensor on that light so that it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of that security light and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best because yellow wavelengths are the least attractive to nocturnal insects. If we switched out our white lights for yellow lights overnight, we would save billions of insects and billions of dollars too, because they're a lot more energy efficient. Fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where 511 species of caterpillars develop on oaks. A few of them, like the Polyphemus moth caterpillar, completes its development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then it spins a cocoon and hangs from the branch. Then it emerges as an adult, and then it does it all over again. I wish everything did that. But most of them don't. Most species will finish growing as caterpillars on the tree and then drop from the tree and wiggle their way underneath the ground where they form a pupa, or they spin a cocoon and pupate in the leaf litter that is under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. This is the way we landscape everywhere. We've got grass right up to the tree, and the ground is mowed and trampled. It's compacted so hard that the caterpillars can't wiggle their way underneath the ground. So this becomes an ecological trap. The caterpillars develop in the trees, drop down, and die. And I am convinced this is another major reason for insect declines. This is what most people do. They have a big tree and a lawn. Nobody's measured how well caterpillars actually survive in a situation like that. But I guarantee they're going to survive better in a situation like this, where you have a tree, but you have a layered landscape, maybe a dogwood and a native azalea, ferns, ground cover. This is a safe site. The caterpillars drop down. The ground is very loose. They can easily get underground and pupate, or they can spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that is under these plants here. Survivorship will be much higher. This is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. It's beautiful, but this is the way you shrink your lawn. You put a big bed around all your trees. Safe sites. This is where you use your native ground covers like wild ginger or foam flower or mayapple or ferns. This is a hotel in Georgia, in Athens, Georgia. These are red maples. Any caterpillar developing on these red maples will drop down into a safe site, even though it's the middle of a city. So we can do much better in terms of getting caterpillars to complete their development. Another one of my former students, Desiree Narango, did some wonderful work with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And the results of her work suggest there is compromise in our selection of plants. What she did was look at how well landscapes that were landscaped primarily with native plants sustain chickadee populations versus landscapes dominated by introduced plants. And the first thing she found is when they're dominated by the introduced ornamentals from Asia, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, we reduced the amount of bird food by 75%. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. There are nest boxes up in each one of these landscapes, but the chickadees would come and look around and say, there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, those nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. Those clutches were 29% less likely to survive at all. The nest produced 1.2 fewer fledglings if they did survive, and it took them 1.5 days longer to do that. And if you put all that information into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of woody plant biomass in your yard, non-native plant biomass, from none to 100%. The reason we're looking at woody plant biomass is because that's where chickadees forage, on woody plants. This is what you get. This dotted line is replacement rate. That's the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you reproduce at this rate, that's a sustainable population. If you make more babies than adults die, you have a growing population, anything above this line. But if you make fewer babies, anything below this line, you have a declining, unsustainable population. Right here is where those lines intersect, very generously speaking, which means you can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass non-native in your yard. Can't be invasive, so no calorie pears, no barberries. But you can have your ginkgos, you can have your crepe myrtles, you can have your boxwood, things that aren't moving around, as long as they don't dominate the landscape, as long as 70% of your biomass is native. And that's the area of compromise that I'm talking about, which to me is good news. If my message was you couldn't have any non-native plants, very few people would be listening because we love our non-native plants. Remember, it's not the presence of non-native plants that destroys food webs. It is the absence of native plants. So if we include more of these in our landscapes, we can support more food webs. Can native plants be used in formal designs? Of course they can. I got this just the other day. You can't get more formal than that. This was taken from a drone, so it's a big garden actually, by Lynn O'Shaughnessy. Every plant in that design is a native plant. So formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe every day. And I guess that's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. All of a sudden they're not weeds anymore. They're pretty plants. They service our native bees. Remember why we need pollinators. You hear that because they pollinate a third of our crops. But then people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need pollinators. Forget the crops. It's really about 1/12 of our crops. We need pollinators because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. Where do we need pollinators? Everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. What about this design? A Drew Latham design, much bigger. Imagine the amount of life that is here versus the amount of life that is here. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Of course they can. And many of them are doing it more and more every day. Minnesota started out with a cost sharing program to encourage homeowners to add Minnesota prairie plants, take out some lawn and put in some appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. They call it lawn to legume program. You get paid to do that. Pennsylvania has a new lawn conversion program. It's only 2 years old. You can get up to $5,000 per acre if you're converting your lawn to a productive ecosystem. Florida is an island off Florida where they're paying residents to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. And this is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you've got an endangered species on your property, you get paid to take care of it, as opposed to fined if you use your property at all. Missouri, Fayetteville, Arkansas have a bounty on calorie pears. You take out a calorie pear and you get a free tree replacement. Even public utilities are getting into that, giving people, San Antonio, you get a $100 coupon if you put in water efficient native plants. And of course, there's those great lawn conversion programs in the far west, particularly California. We get $2 per square foot rebate if you take out that thirsty lawn and put in appropriate xeric plantings. You know, I think we've made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. And the first misstep is we've assumed nature is not essential. We like it, it's pretty, it entertains us, but it's not essential. And of course, if it's not essential, whenever resources are short, nature takes a back seat. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out, and there's this wall-sized poster there that epitomizes, in my view, our society's view of conservation. We've got to save nature, save wildlife, so that future generations can enjoy it. Or at least that's what I take away from this poster. And that was Teddy Roosevelt's reasoning. Create the national park system so that future generations can enjoy the splendor of nature. Which is true, we want them to do that, but it suggests nature's there just for our entertainment. No wonder we don't think it's essential. You know, Congress, you know where the budget for the national park system is? It's under non-essential items. That's where Congress has put it. It's not a very big budget either. The entire budget for the national park system is equal to the cost of one B-1 bomber. So that's where we rank it. Nope. Nature is essential, folks. We need nature so that we have future generations. It's not just for entertainment. Another misstep is that we've assumed humans and nature cannot coexist. And we talked about this. If we confine our conservation efforts just to places where there aren't a lot of humans, we're going to fail because those places are not big enough and they're too disconnected. David Quammen has an excellent analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. This is a functional Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that's exactly what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. And I hate that terminology because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance. Even if we destroyed it, it's got significance, including your yard, including the corporate landscapes, including all of our roadsides. So what we need to do is glue our rug back together again, put those keystone plants in. We're not just going to create biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move back and forth between viable habitats. We're going to create viable habitats where we live, where we work, where we play, and even to some extent where we farm. We're going to start coexisting, sharing our spaces with nature. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship just a few specialists, a few ecologists, a few conservation biologists. We did not see it as an inherent responsibility of every human being on the planet. But I don't know why, because every human being on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody bear responsibility for good Earth stewardship? Stan Rushworth, a Cherokee elder, once said, the Western settler mindset is, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You were not born with those mindsets, you were taught those mindsets. We've been great at teaching this one. We've been terrible at teaching our kids and our peers about their obligations to basic Earth stewardship. It doesn't mean that you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. So many of us feel powerless today. The Earth's problems are huge. There's nothing one person can do. Not so. One person can shrink their lawn, can take out their invasive plants, can put in a pollinator garden, and can use keystone plants. One person can do that, recreate a functional ecosystem right in their yard, and watch it happen. That makes a single person an important cog in the future wheel of conservation. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. Just worry about your little piece of the planet. If you own property, that's obvious. That's where you're going to start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or a preserve. They're all underfunded, all understaffed. They will love you. So as property owners or as volunteers, each one of us has the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate, and then ultimately our own fate. I think I've convinced my grandkids that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Doug. Well, it's a wonderful presentation. I've always been absolutely astounded by the connection of nature that we have and how we can do something right in your backyard, right? I have about 160 different species of native plants in my garden, and I know what it brings. So there are a couple of questions in the chat, and one of the things that is really on a lot of Rotarians' minds are mosquitoes. Mosquitoes not only here, obviously overseas where mosquitoes carry malaria, and so there are problems with that. So bringing nature home, how do we control the mosquitoes in our neighborhood and even overseas? If we're bringing nature here, mosquitoes are part of nature, how do we suppress those to make it a comfortable place to live? We don't have the malaria problem, but other places do. That's the first question.
Well, that was part of the talk, and I was worried about time, so I took it out. I'm sorry I did that, but Right now, Mosquito Joe goes around and fogs every place. It's a booming business all over the country. And unfortunately, it's a booming business all over the country, and it's undoing everything that I said for a couple of reasons. Mosquito Joe will say, well, this fog is a natural product, so it's okay. And it is a natural product. It's pyrethroids. It's made from chrysanthemums. But cyanide is a natural product too, so that doesn't make it okay. He'll also say that it only kills mosquitoes. And I wish that were true, but it's not. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with. The big thing is Mosquito Joe that everybody wants to hire doesn't work. In order to kill mosquitoes in the adult stage, you have to kill 90% of them. Mosquito Joe studies have shown that kills about 10% of them. And that's why he has to keep coming back and spraying and charging you a lot of money. So you're paying a lot of money for an approach that doesn't work. If you want to control mosquitoes, you do it in the larval stage. And they're very directed control methods. A simple way for homeowners here in this country is you get a bucket and you fill it full of water and you put in straw or hay and let it ferment for a couple of days. What you're doing is building up the algae and diatom community in that bucket. And that becomes irresistible to mosquitoes that want to lay their eggs there. So they do lay their eggs there. Then you go to the hardware store and you get something called a mosquito dunk. It's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural bacillus that only kills aquatic diptera. And the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is a mosquito. So you put a disc in there, the larvae will eat it and they will die. If there's a dragonfly that gets in your bucket, it won't hurt it. If your dog licks it or if a bird drinks it, won't hurt it a bit. So it's very directed, targeted. And if everybody did that, it would really knock the mosquito populations down. You know, controlling mosquitoes in Africa and other places where we have huge malarial problems it's a big job. People have been working on that for centuries. So they're using all different types of techniques, including mosquito dunks, but they're breeding in so many different places, and I can't give you the answer to that right now, because actually, if I had the answer to that, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. But we can control them in our yards. And you know, the mosquitoes that we have problems with here, they're invasive species. It's Aedes aegypti from Egypt. It's the Asian tiger mosquito. For the most part, they're the bad actors over here. And which means they're here without their major natural enemies. And that always creates huge problems.
Thanks, Doug. I think you've answered part of the second question, was to do with spraying for insects around your house. But before I just get to that, the mosquito eggs are actually eaten by copepods. And so copepods in America are actually good for growing up to eat mosquito eggs. But over in Africa, there's still diseases that are carried by copepods. And so unless you have clean water, then you've got a problem. So, yeah. So that's just a thing. But there's a question to do with beneficial insects, and it basically to a person who's spraying pesticides, every insect is not a beneficial insect, so it just goes. So that was the question. And then the next question, and probably the last one we have time for, would be where are there some exemplary cities for showing us about what's being really done well as far as bringing nature home in the cities.
I would look to St. Louis as a role model. They're doing lots of important things. There's a woman there named Jean Ponzi. If anybody wants to contact her, she can show you around and show you all the different programs they've had in St. Louis to get this message out, to distribute native plants. They're making great progress there. So if I look for a city role model, it would be St. Louis.
Okay. We haven't been given the hook yet, so the next question is climate change affecting the viability of native plants? And so, well, firstly, understanding what a native plant is, a plant in the right place, and then obviously how climate change is affecting it.
Right. A native plant is a plant that co-evolved with the plants and animals around it. You know, a lot of people are thinking about what we call assisted migration, where you're moving plants up from the south so that they're able to handle the warmer temperatures. But Yesterday morning, it snowed in our yard here, which is just a good example of what climate change really is. It's extreme climate variability. We're getting all kinds of wild fluctuations. Yes, we're getting heat waves. We're getting drought. We're getting pounding rain. But we're also getting those polar vortexes that come down. Look what happened in Texas just a few weeks ago. We had a deep freeze all the way down into Mexico. So if we move plants north, you get those deep freezes, which will continue to come. They won't make it. What we have to do is hope that the genetic variability in our native plant populations is enough to allow them to adapt to these serious challenges that we're throwing at them.
Okay. A question, this is rather curious. Do you recommend any specific plants that attract beneficial insects or birds to keep certain insect populations in check? I guess that was part of the mosquito thing, but anything else?
Well, a lot of people worry about the caterpillars they see in their yard. My chickadees and everything else are eating, several hundred caterpillars a day. People say, I want to go out and find those ones you just showed me pictures of. And they go out and look, they can't find them. The birds have eaten them first. So birds are tremendous natural enemies of the caterpillars that people worry about. But it's true. The things that control insects the most are little teeny parasitic wasps, little parasitoids. And as soon as you spray for something, you kill all of them first. And that starts this pesticide syndrome where you've knocked out the natural enemies. So then the problem insects do build up, and then you got to spray again, and you're locked into it forever. Spraying is the very last alternative, and it's usually directed, or should only be directed, against those invasive insects like gypsy moth and things that are here without their natural enemies. But typically, in a well-balanced ecosystem, the natural enemies take care of pests. Most of the insects that are out there, you should start thinking of all the insects as being beneficial, because remember, they're the little things that run the world. And the only ones you should be worrying about spraying or treating in some way would be the things that eat your house, like termites. Those are real, you got to control those. But almost everything else is not going to hurt you, and we should just hold off on all the spray that we homeowners use. If you go to Home Depot or any of your garden centers, look at the shelves lined with the pesticides that we buy all the time. And we use it because of entomophobia. We're just afraid of insects. It's not because they're actually hurting us or our houses.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I just wanted to mention we are going to have the 10th brood of the cicada that's coming out, which is going to be really noisy for us here for the next month or so after the temperature of the soil gets to 64 degrees at 8 inches down. So one of the things I want to just remind people about is, now this is a natural system. These animals come out and then they go back into the soil and then they stay away. These ones stay away for 17 years, just sucking the sap of trees under the ground. So we need to have trees there for them to come back out again. But towards the end of the life of the periodic cicada is the annual cicada that comes along. And with the annual cicada, we will have this amazing wasp that emerges around about the same time. So in June, this wasp is around the size of your thumb. It's close to 2 inches long, and it's absolutely harmless unless you actually grab it and hold it and squeeze it. But it's like such a monster that's going to be flying around looking for cicadas, and this happens every year for us. We'd like to make any comment about that, and then I think we just wrap it up and hand it back to the organization.
Yeah, you're talking about the cicada killer, and
yes.
The interesting thing is the females are busy. They catch cicadas, they sting them to paralyze them. They don't kill them, and they stuff them down the hole that they've dug, and then they lay an egg on it, and their larva develops on that cicada, and they go about their business. It's the males that are flying around patrolling where those mosquitoes, where the females are nesting, because every time she catches a cicada and puts it in the hole, she's going to mate again. And the males want to keep all the other males away. As a matter of fact, they want to keep everything away, including you. So when you walk by on the sidewalk and there are males there trying to guard their females, it looks like they're chasing you. Remember, males have no stingers. They are absolutely harmless, but it's the biggest Sphecid wasp in North America. It does look menacing. But just realize the wasp chasing you is a male, it's harmless, and it's just trying to keep you from mating with its female. So don't mate with its female and it will be okay.
Thank you very much, Doug.
But that's a good example. Don't hire a pesticide guy to come and spray all those things. It's a natural phenomenon. People worry about, all the insects. Here's a predator keeping those insects in check. They're not going to hurt you.
I'd just like to thank you again for a wonderful presentation. We are nature's best hope in keeping our ecological services going. And you've reminded us, we'll be looking out for your publications as they come along. I'm really looking forward to reading the next book that's just arrived on my desk about oaks.
Right. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ashley or Alan?
No, it's
Andy?
me. Chris, you're
Andy,
better
you're
than
there.
you.
Okay.
What an hour. What an hour getting buzzed and learning about It's a Bug's Life. I've taken so many notes, I don't know where to start. But thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, Doug. We certainly appreciate your time you spent with us today. Well, this time we were supposed to get a few words from our director from our own district, but we're having some audio and some visual difficulties with him. And we're going to try again tomorrow to bring him on. I know he was looking forward to welcoming and saying a few words, but we will get him on tomorrow, so you'll have to come back for that. At this point, one of the highlight, I don't know how you call a highlight our memorial service, but it's one of the things that we've been doing in our district for quite a few years. And it, I think, is very, very, very important as we recognize those Rotarians that are no longer with us over the past year. So please join me in welcoming back Reverend Dr. Allen as she presents our memorial service. Carletta?
Would you confirm that I can be seen and heard?
Well, I can hear you.
All right, 1 second. And now I can be seen and heard. My head is spinning. That was such an amazing presentation. Oh my goodness. I mean, I know this much about nature, and that was just wonderful. And a wonderful segue into what we are about to do, because we are a huge ecosystem. And of course, those of us who are human believe that we are at the top of it. There are those who would disagree with that. But what we know is that those who claim the name Rotary, those who have subscribed to this way of living, those whose basic philosophy of life is the Rotary four-way test are different. And I'd like to think that we are pollinating the world with all kinds of wondrous things. And so it is fitting that we pause to remember those Rotarians we have lost over the past year. The wonderful thing about being a Rotarian is that you leave a legacy. During my year as president, one of the best eulogies I've ever heard of someone was delivered by his grandson. And he talked all about Rotary. As a matter of fact, he mentioned the four-way test so many times that those of us who were in attendance lost count. I'd never seen a tribute like that. But his grandfather's life was centered around the four-way test. We leave a tremendous legacy when we are Rotarians. So much good has been left behind. And so we pause for a few moments to remember those who have gone on, to remember the legacy that they have left behind. And those of you who knew them, who work with them, are called to carry on their banner. George Stovey, David Clark, Ken Davis of Hunt Valley, Theodore Hamady of Washington, D.C., Bill Moody of Lexington Park, Howard Payne of Frederick. We knew him as J. Arthur James Pugh of Washington, D.C., Fernan Tersiguel, I hope I didn't butcher that, John Weiss of Annapolis. We remember our fellow Rotarians and their commitment to service above self.
Thank you, Carletta. I appreciate that very, very much as we wrap up our services there. Thank you again. Well, folks, we've come to that point. We've heard from a very engaged speaker. We've recognized the Rotarians. We've recognized those that have passed. We've heard from our district governor this evening. It's been, for me, it's been tremendous, and I've enjoyed being with you this evening as well. Tomorrow we'll begin at 11:55 a.m. and I can guarantee you, you are going to enjoy tomorrow's show. The four-way test is one of the highlights, along with many breakout sessions presenting valuable insights and education about Rotary. Club and district awards will be presented, along with many speakers. There'll be over 8 hours of events planned for you by the program committee. There is a note, though. Our Major General Jones has been called away, and in pivoting, one of our favorite words of the year, the Reverend Dr. Carletta Allen will be stepping in and presenting tomorrow evening. So please put that on your schedule. Make sure you're there. It is going to be an excellent presentation on diversity. Okay, with that being said, if I had the bell right now, I tell you, please enjoy your evening, and I look forward to seeing you as we reconvene in the morning. Ashley?